Good afternoon, everybody, and you are very welcome during these extraordinary conditions that we're all in. Most welcome to this first session in the Keeping the Tourism Dream Alive series by the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage. Before we get started, just a few general housekeeping rules for you. You're all on mute, obviously to avoid background noise. I'm sure we've all been part of webinars recently where there's a lot of background noise, so we want to try and keep it to a minimum. But please do feel free to use the chat or question function on your screen to ask any questions during the presentation, and we'll obviously get through as many as we can towards the end. So this is the first session in a series of 12 where we will be hearing from global experts in the fields of marketing and communications, tourism data, aviation, hospitality, and many more. So please do feel free to sign up to the whole series and indeed share the links with your friends and industry colleagues too. Finally, we can't provide any of these sessions without the kind support of our partners in this series. So a huge thanks to all of our partners, which you'll see listed on the screen just now. There they are. So let me introduce myself properly first of all. My name is Jed Brown and I'm the founder and CEO of Low Season Traveller, and also it's my privilege and honour to be the Managing Director EMEA of the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage. And of course, I will be your moderator for this series. And what a series we've got for you. Our first episode is Tourism Business Survival, Revival and Resilience to COVID-19. And I'm delighted to introduce you to our keynote speaker for today. David Bierman has been a full-time lecturer of tourism at the University of Technology since 2009 after 30 years experience in the travel and tourism industry. In his specialist field of tourism, risk, crisis and recovery management, David Beirman is widely published and has provided keynote speeches at tourism conferences in over 20 countries. David is a member of PARTA's Tourism Rapid Response Task Force, which assists the tourism industries and tourism ministries in 60 countries throughout Asia and the Pacific Rim in the field of risk, crisis and recovery management. He's got a close working relationship with the United Nations World Tourism Organization and is a foundation member of the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's Smart Traveller Consultative Group. Finally, David is the co-chair of the Tourism Risk, Crisis and Recovery Special Interest Group of the Council for Australasian University Tourism and Hospitality Educators. David, very welcome to the series. It's an honour and a privilege to have you with us. And with that, the floor is all yours. Straight over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jed, and it's a real pleasure to be the first up speakers. I just actually wanted to make sure that we've got our presentation here. It seems to have disappeared, which is a bit of a worry.
We can have a chat until it comes up, David. That's fine.
We could indeed, yes. Anyway, here we go. I think that looks like.
Oh, there you go.
Yes,
there
beautiful.
You go.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I'll leave it to you, David. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much indeed, Jed. Anyway, it's a privilege to be here. We all know that, of course, in our wonderful tourism industry, we are going through difficult times. I know the words unprecedented have been pouring off the lips of many people for a very long time. It isn't, of course, the first crisis that we've had. So let me just make sure that we're going here. Okay. Okay, so let's firstly just look at the situation as it is right now. So as you can see from the first map there, we are now approaching with coronavirus of 2019, or COVID-19 as everybody's calling it. We are now approaching 3 million cases around the world. In fact, probably by today we will have passed that. We've exceeded 207,000 deaths, and we've also had a very high recovery rate. But I think it's important just to give you a little bit of context in terms of where we've been. This is not the first, and it certainly isn't the last pandemic that we've experienced in the 21st century. We've had SARS, which I guess when you look at it in terms of what we're experiencing now was pretty tiny. 8,000 cases and around about 800 deaths, and that was in 2003. It came and went in a matter of months. A much larger one, which a lot of people seem to have forgotten, was what was H1N1 or swine flu. Now, swine flu, interestingly enough, and this just gives you a little bit of comparison with now, swine flu in the period between around about March 2009 and June of 2010 actually infected 1 billion people. It led to 526,000 deaths. So in terms of pure numbers, coronavirus or COVID-19 actually isn't the biggest, but certainly it's a very, very deadly one. The death rate, for example, with swine flu was less than half of 1%. The death rate, of course, in coronavirus is much higher. It's around about 7%, and that's really a matter of great concern. The thing which I guess makes it different in certain areas, and again, let's just see if I can get that to the next slide. Here we go. Okay, you can already see that the spread is quite enormous. So at the moment, we have the United States, unfortunately, topping both the case numbers and death numbers very significantly, followed by Spain, Italy, Germany, UK, France. China, where it all started, appears, at least based on the Chinese figures that have come out, to have plateaued around about 83,000 cases, most of those recovery, and 4,000 deaths. Here in Australia, where I am, we've had a relatively modest number of cases and a relatively modest mortality rate from coronavirus. However, that's what's been happening in many places, is that the coronavirus has actually forced us into behaviours which have particularly affected tourism, which basically go against everything that we've ever been used to. So we're talking about isolation. You have to understand, tourism is a very social activity, whether people are going in their thousands on a cruise, whether people are crammed into a low-cost carrier, whether people are going on a group tour. The measures that have been made that have been introduced to minimise people's exposure to coronavirus virtually go against everything that we've been used to doing as a travel industry, and this is one of the big challenges that we're having to face. I'll see if that's doing a little bit of work. I seem to have to press this down. Here we go. Okay, so in a sense, this has been one of the coronavirus or COVID-19's really been the biggest challenge that the tourism industry's had to face. Certainly in my professional experience, I go back around about 43 years into the tourism industry. I first started as a tour guide in 1977, and I've spoken to many friends and colleagues who've been in the industry for a lot longer than me, and I think that the word is, this is totally different. So we have enormous challenges actually in dealing with this. One of the challenges you can actually see here on this map is that the ability of people to actually travel has been really constrained by regulation and also by travel advisories. As Jed mentioned at the beginning, I've been involved with what we call the Consular Consulting Group. Consular Consulting Group is a group of travel industry leaders who advise the Australian Government's Department of Foreign Affairs on matters to do with travel advisories. I know Chris Flynn, who's a very important person within this organisation, was also a member of that for many, many years when he was working for PATA. And I think both Chris and I can certainly attest to the fact that never, ever have we had a map like this. This is Australia's travel advisories. It has Australia in white and the rest of the world in red. So what's actually happened here? Is that the Australian government is saying, do not travel to any other country. That's its advisory. It's not an order. I think we've seemed to have had some little technical problem here. The presentation seems to have disappeared for a second. I hope we can get it back. But while we're sort of waiting for that, of course, while the Australian government has been telling people not to travel not to travel anywhere, we've found that other countries, okay, thank you very much. I think we've got that back again, and I'll just try and get that down to the next slide. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So what we've found is that the UK now, for example, through Travel Aware, the UK has actually been advising its citizens against all non-essential travel overseas. That's not quite as extreme as the Australian Travel Advisory. The United States, by contrast, has been looking at telling people to be very careful about where they're traveling, and in fact has banned travel with a number of countries. It started with China, but now it includes many other countries around the world. The important thing, I guess, to understand is that this is global. So we have, you know, as well as Western European countries, as well as the United States and Canada, we've had countries like Iran with high levels of cases. We've had many countries in Asia with high levels of cases. So this is a truly global phenomenon that we're coming up against. One of the biggest challenges that we've had has been the virtual closure of borders, not only borders between nations, but also borders within nations. So as I'm speaking here, as a person in Sydney, if I wanted to go to the Gold Coast in Queensland, I can't do it, let alone traveling to New Zealand or UK or other places. So this is one of the very unprecedented issues that has arisen actually through the coronavirus. Okay, let's see if I can get down to the next slide there. Thank you. Okay, so when we start looking at what makes this particular coronavirus unique amongst tourism crises since World War II, firstly, it's the global extent and limitation on travel and tourism. That's been something that's been really quite extraordinary. I'll see if we can get to the next one. No. Sorry, if we can just have the next little bit there. Okay. It's also too, and this is something which we're all sharing, whichever part of the tourism industry you're working in, you're affected by coronavirus. Hotels have to have very strict rules of hygiene. There are strict rules of separation. We find that events, for example, are very restricted because of social distancing regulations which have applied. Attractions cannot attract as many people as they used to be. One of the sectors which has really been affected, of course, is cruising. Okay, so we've got a quick poll here. Between 1950 and 2020, tourism became more affordable and available. Do you think that post-COVID-19 it will be, okay, more expensive and exclusive, the same as it was before, open to more people to make up for the downturn? So this is an interesting thing. I'd be interested to see how you would actually see this one. So you're all invited to take the poll. So the general media, just without trying to influence anybody's opinions on this one here, the media basically have taken the view, and I know over the last few weeks I've been interviewed by probably around about 40 media outlets, which have tended to come to the conclusion that tourism is going to be a lot more expensive after coronavirus. And we've heard talk, for example, of airlines cutting out middle seats in economy class. We've heard of cruise ships which are going to have much more social distancing involved. We're looking at sporting events. At the moment, of course, if you go to a sporting event, you're probably very privileged because only the players and the officials are there. There's no crowd. So we're certainly seeing some really interesting things. How did we go with the results of that poll?
Yeah, the poll looks like it's 61% say more expensive and exclusive, 9% saying the same as it was before, and 30% open to more people to make up for it. So yeah, vast majority it's looking like, believe, more expensive and exclusive, David.
Well, that's what the media has been certainly suggesting. I know I've been interviewed by a lot of media who's asked that question. It's a pretty obvious question to answer. I guess also too, one of the challenges for us as a tourism industry is the whole model in which we've done business for decades now has been volume and very low margins. And a lot of that's going to come into question, I think, after coronavirus. But we might proceed with the presentation. We seem to have, we've got a big ugly picture of me, but we seem to have lost the presentation there for a second. Wonder if we can get that back.
Yeah, we're just trying to get that back for you now, David.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Jed. Anyway, so thank you very much for your participation in the poll. It's nice to see so many of you are here, and we'll be back to our presentation in just a tick. In the meantime, of course, we really need to have a very hard look about how we're actually how we as tourism businesses are going to survive, because, as I say, one of the characteristics about coronavirus is this has affected every single sector. So one of the ones which is probably most surprising, I guess, is travel agents, because travel agents' fallback position usually when there's been a crisis. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, the travel agents' fallback position has often been, well, if we can't sell destination A, we can sell destination B. Now they're finding that it's very difficult to sell any destination, and in fact I think most people who are working in travel agencies are really working on life support to a large extent. The sector which has really come under a lot of attack, and some of it quite unfairly I have to say, has been the cruise sector. A lot of people actually forget that the cruise industry has actually operated it under a very strong set of risk management protocols called SOLAS, which is the saving of life at sea. And SOLAS actually came into being in 1914, just 2 years after the Titanic disaster. And SOLAS included making sure that there were enough lifeboats on a ship, making sure hygiene standards were great, making sure maintenance standards were strong, and also to making sure that health standards on board ships was of a very high standard. The difficulty, and it's something that I've explained to many media before, is that when a ship comes into port, it is subject to the rules and regulations of the country in which it is berthing. So some of those ships that were quarantined for long periods, especially the first groups, the Diamond Princess and others in Yokohama, Sihanoukville, and Hong Kong, they were quarantined under the jurisdiction of those various governments: the Hong Kong government, the Japanese government, and the Cambodian government. We had a big case here in Australia, a ship called the Ruby Princess, which has been the source of around about 25% of our coronavirus cases here in Australia. The passengers were allowed to disembark by the state government of New South Wales. But the media has decided that the real villain of the piece is actually the cruise ship itself. The cruise ship were not guilty of that, but it is really important that when a particular sector is attacked like that, that it also has to defend itself actively. And one thing that I've been a little bit critical with Cruise Lines International is it's always been very reluctant to engage with the media. It is important, particularly during a crisis like that, that it does so. So we found, for example, with cruising, after the incident of the 3 ships in Asia, the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs advised that Australian travellers should reconsider the need to cruise, which is, if that isn't poison to a sector, I don't know what is. So we've had this issue where the cruise industry has been under attack and really hasn't probably effectively presented its case. I'm not saying that the cruise industry is innocent by any means, but I think it's really important if a sector comes under attack, that sector really has to defend itself. And I think the rest of the tourism industry has to also come to their defense as well. Cruising actually has, obviously because of the very social nature of cruising, it is vulnerable in many cases to pandemics and epidemics and other communicable diseases, something we should be aware of, and certainly something that the cruise industry needs to address into the future. Okay, let's see how we go, if I can get that moving. Very good. Okay, so tourism business is under siege. Okay, so I'm going to look at 5 key themes. I'll go straight to them. So that there are a number of themes for businesses to try and survive through this. The first, of course, is to find ways and means of developing cash flow and financial equity, and I'll come to some specific points on that. The other thing which has been a characteristic of coronavirus in most countries in the world has been an enormous amount of government support directed at small business, government support directed at big businesses, government support for employees who are being either stood down or who are underemployed, government support for micro businesses, and of course the nature of government support varies a lot from one country to another. I know because we're an international group here, each of our governments probably has different types of support, but I guess it's axiomatic for any of us working in the industry to actually understand exactly what support your business is entitled to, whether you're in the accommodation sector, travel agency sector, airline sector, or whatever. We've found that, for example, a lot of governments have treated airlines in particular as strategic assets. So quite a few airlines have either been given tax holidays or have been bailed out in various ways. Again, it's going to vary a lot from country to country, but it's really important. I can't remember any time in history where governments around the world have provided so much support for businesses which are languishing due to the coronavirus. So this has been very important. The other thing too, of course, is the need to diversify businesses. There have been too many travel businesses which have focused on a single destination, a single type of product. This is not the time to be doing that. This is certainly the time, and I think when we start looking at how recovery is going to occur around the world, and I'm going to give you the example of Tourism Australia because they've developed a really good strategy. But I think you'll find that most recoveries will start with local tourism, go into domestic tourism, go into nearby international tourism, and then medium and long haul tourism. So keeping that in mind, it is very, very important for us to try and make sure that we're targeting our business in a way that will garner the most impact and the most return. If you've been used to marketing a distant destination, you better start getting to know your local area fairly well and see what opportunities come there. The other thing too, looking at what you can do during this particular period of time, obviously there is a downtime for just about every travel business. So this is a good time to start thinking strategically. And strategic planning, of course, is long-term planning. Most companies are going to have to revise their mission statements, their sense of direction, the type of business they're going to do, their unique qualities. They're going to have to do their SWOT analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is a time to really plan your business. And the good news at the end of all this is, although we don't know when the recovery period is going to take place, I think we can be pretty certain that there will be a recovery. So we are basically now in survival mode. But after survival mode, when borders do start to reopen, when airlines are starting to fly again, when there's movement at the station, so to speak, there will be a significant resurgence. I know some of the pessimists are talking about many years to recover. I think anyone who's really looked at crises, tourism crises over the last 50 years or so, will have recognised the fact that tourism recovers much more quickly today than it did, 20, 30 years ago, and that's the good news. What we don't know, of course, is what the nature of the new tourism environment is going to be. Okay, so let's see if we can get this moving again. Oh, I know what to do. Okay. So let's have a look at some issues about cash flows. I'll try and put these up here because I like to do this firstly. One thing which a lot of operators have done for years, and I think of my mates in the Travel Corporation as a great example of that, and that is early bird deals. I guess in a sense, if we wanted to try and build some cash flow, we could do some really early bird deals. People will want to travel in the future. People will want to cruise in the future. Despite all the gloom and doom about cruising, cruising has a very, very strong core market which will cruise no matter what. The other thing which a lot of businesses forget, I know I had my own business for 20 years and it was the bit I hated most, but make sure that any money that you're owed has been collected. That's really important to do that. I know it's talking about the bleeding obvious, but it really is significant. The other thing too, of course, there's been a huge demand on a lot of travel businesses to get refunds. One of the challenges in dealing with this sensitively, rather than just handing over money willy-nilly, is to try and encourage your clients to postpone their trip or their stay or their booking for as long as they can. Most principals will provide you with the ability to actually extend to extend trips and to extend timings. If you can avoid that, that would be very, very good. The other thing too about is looking at alternatives to loans to generate capital. One thing I often do in teaching my students risk management, I actually run 2 risk management subjects here at UTS, and I look at the issue of financial risk management, and the last choice of obtaining extra finance is taking on a loan, because you're not, of course, only repaying the loan, but you've already repaying the interest. If you can find partners, equity partners, white knights, etc., to come and invest in your organisation, you might lose a little bit of ownership, but you also might be enabling survival. And the other thing, of course, I've mentioned about government support, so I won't repeat that, but one thing a lot of businesses don't do is to find alternative products and services to sell. I guess what prompted me to say this is when I used to be a rep many, many years ago, and I actually got to see practically every travel agency in Sydney over a 2-year period, I noticed a lot of tourism business, a lot of travel agents in particular, were real estate agents, fruit stores. I saw one in a chemist, one in a Spanish restaurant. You can actually run parallel businesses, and this could actually be a very good survival strategy. Now, I'm not suggesting that every travel business can do that. I realise that an airline can't be a cruise company, but there are sometimes ways and means in which you can actually diversify the business so that you actually are providing a service which may not be directly travel related, but it will be a means to keep on members of staff and a survival strategy until travel comes back. I think, again, we need to be a little bit creative in terms of how we look at our survival strategies. Okay, let's see if I can get this doing. Okay. Okay. Also, too, of course, I know it's something that's been told to me here at the university. We've got to take all the leave that we have. Very important thing that you need to do, because again, we're thinking of the future, is maintain good relations with your stakeholders. Don't forget that they're a really important part of your business, and they're going to be there if you can maintain correct relations with them. Make sure that you've spoken to them, you've communicated with them, even if you have difficulty perhaps paying monies that you might owe them. Making sure that you keep your stakeholders on side is a very, very valuable asset, because they're going to be they're going to need you at some stage. Okay, let's see how we go. Okay, our second theme, which I've already discussed a little bit, has been the huge amount of government support that comes into that's been coming into businesses. Now, tourism has been a beneficiary of that. I know that certainly many of the national tourism organisations around the world have been given extra funding by their respective governments. A lot of them have pivoted towards promoting domestic tourism, because that will certainly be the first type of tourism which will start to thrive. But it is, if you don't really understand the gobbledygook of bureaucracy and how you can access support, then it's probably a very good idea to speak to your accountant or somebody who really has some expertise on that area to explain to you how you can access government support. And there's a lot of different types of government support. Governments have usually been public saying we're going to give billions of dollars or millions of dollars in support, but they often don't tell you how to do it. So make sure that you, if you don't do it yourself, find somebody who can give you good advice on getting that kind of support. Another type of support which governments are giving are offering skills training. There's a lot of money that's been poured into training, which can help you. You can also find too that certainly students who are studying tourism, whether they're doing it at higher education level at universities, or whether they're doing it at technical colleges, or whether they're doing it private colleges, could be a very, very good source of low cost or even free assistance. Don't be shy about taking this. Again, very important, if you're a company and you have no alternative but to lay off your staff, at least try and assist them in finding a new job. Most businesses have outplacement organisations, because if you treat your employees well, even the ones that you have to lay off, they will come back to you when the business resumes. It's always very important, I think, in these very difficult times, is to make sure that you keep the relations as harmonious as possible. And it's everybody understands what a difficult time we're all going through. Okay, let's see if we can get this moving. Okay. I've mentioned a little bit about diversifying business. One thing that we've certainly learnt over the coronavirus is that international businesses really suffered a great deal. So certainly it's critical, I think, for most tourism businesses around the world to certainly enhance their abilities with domestic tourism, because that is the first part of tourism which will recover. I don't know how many times I've said this to various organisations, is never put all your eggs in one basket. I know the last job that I had before I started working for the university, I was marketing manager of an international wholesaler, and we actually did about 15 destinations in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East. Unfortunately, even though that was very diverse, under these circumstances, it's not diverse enough, and a lot of businesses are going to have to again revisit domestic tourism. I've also mentioned about how some travel agents can actually run multiple businesses within their organisation, and I think that's actually a pretty good way to go. Okay. So as I've mentioned, the most viable market at the moment, certainly in the immediate future, is going to be domestic tourism, and I think also too, because tourists recognise the fact that they're limited in what they can do, and it's going to take a while before borders really reopen. Local tourism has incredibly huge opportunities, and I often look at programs like from the UK about railways around the UK, and I realise that the UK is not a particularly large country, but it has so much diversity, and a lot of people have because international travel has been so easy to do and so inexpensive, a lot of people in many countries in the world have actually ignored traveling in their own countries and have gone to just about everybody else's. It also too, we look at the issue about accommodation providers. Accommodation providers have had a very high level of dependence on international visitation because most countries are not receiving much in visitation from overseas. It is important to really start to cultivate the domestic market. So certainly a message that I keep repeating, but I think it's very important, is domestic really is your first choice. Okay, we'll see if thank you. Okay, sorry, just one other little thing too, and I actually remember this was some people actually have incredible expertise about various destinations, and it's really interesting. A lot of community colleges are actually looking for people who can teach about tourism and destinations. And certainly one offer, if you're an expert in a particular destination or an expert in a particular type of tourism, this is an opportunity for you to teach. If you can't do, you can certainly teach, and that could be an option for, not for everybody, but certainly for some people. Okay. This has been very stubborn, this link. I'm sorry about this. Okay. Okay, in terms of strategic development, and I think this is something that in terms of strategic development, we know that, for example, business is not what it is. If you look at the main cities of the world, London, Paris, New York, Sydney, Munich, the CBDs are dead. It's really quite an extraordinary place. In fact, I think if we have one thing in common around the world, is that most of our major cities all look like Dead Man's Gulch. I'm expecting to see the tumbleweed go across the, Broadway and Fifth Avenue. We do have some downtime. So one source again of both expertise, creativity, etc., are taking on some student interns. The good thing about student interns, they don't cost you anything. They would have a great learning experience learning from you. They can also come up with ideas that maybe you didn't think about. I'm always amazed every day when I see that my students give presentations, what brilliant ideas that many of them come up with. There's also the opportunity to try and develop future tourism and hospitality products and services. I think if there's one thing we can probably quite easily predict, is that if this particular crisis has shown us anything, operating bricks and mortars travel agencies, unfortunately, may be a thing of the past. It's going to be, it's proven to be a very difficult way to run a business. And if there's one thing we've all had to learn, is we've all had to learn to do things online. Even an old troglodyte like me has now been forced to do all my teaching on Zoom and get to business and all these other different areas. We've been forced to become high tech, whether we liked it or not. If you can also make sure that there's an opportunity while business is not so great, if you can get accredited courses and get your staff enrolled in them to upskill them, that would be fantastic. I don't think there's going to be many familiars during the coronavirus episode, but if there are, that's a great opportunity to send them on. I'm sure that whatever familiars will be around will be incredibly local in scale. But, again, training staff, getting people upskilling, looking at alternative ways to run your business, strategizing, these are very, very important. This is a great opportunity to do this during this very difficult period. Okay, let's see if we can get this thing moving again. It's very stubborn. Okay. Okay, let's have a look at business resurgence. I guess the good news that comes out of this is there will be a resurgence. when you think about people who've been isolated, sitting at home, doing very, very little, the first thing they're going to want to do is to travel. Now, whether that travel initially is domestic or whether it goes to be international, when we don't know the timetables, but I think when you've had people who have been forbidden to do things, and a lot of governments are forbidding us to do an awful lot of things, travel is one of those things which has been treated as forbidden. So I think there's going to be a fairly big resurgence in travel. The shape of the tourism industry, of course, is something that most of you will probably have very strong opinions about. My gut feeling is that certainly in the initial aftermath of coronavirus, that there will be a lot of emphasis on minor forms of social distancing, which could mean that planes that carried 400 passengers might be carrying 200 passengers, ships that carried 6,000 passengers might be carrying 3,000 passengers. The way that we run hotels, the way that we stage attractions and events is likely to change, particularly in the immediate aftermath. So that's something we have to be prepared for. And I guess we also at the same time need to be prepared for the fact that some of these, that we're going to have to do something which is very painful for people in the travel industry, and that is instead of offering discounts, we might have to actually charge surcharges. The slides that I've got following this are actually from Tourism Australia, and Tourism Australia has actually put a lot of the things I've just mentioned into practice. They really have considered where they're going. So let me just come to those slides. Okay, so Tourism Australia is encouraging Australians to holiday at home, see their own backyard. And what they're doing is that they're doing actually a staged recovery strategy. Oops, hang on. Okay, so I might just go back there. Okay, so the first thing that Tourism Australia is doing is that Tourism Australia traditionally has invited international visitors to come to Australia. And I'm sure that whether we're talking about Visit Britain or the French Tourism Bureau or Italian Tourism or ENIT, as I always remember it, all of these organisations, or Incredible India, traditionally they've looked for the international visitor. So the big focus on Tourism Australia's recovery has been to focus on domestic tourism to appeal to the domestic market. Telling people to holiday at home. It's not the first time, by the way, that Tourism Australia has done this, but in response to the coronavirus, they've certainly looked at that. So they've really been pushing domestic tourism. Okay, hopefully we can get to the next one. Thank you. Okay. The international campaign, again, is to try and, I guess, in terms of the theme of these particular webinars, is to keep the dream alive. Get people being aware. I noticed, for example, that when I take the train from the university back to my suburb, I see lots of signs from Great Britain. Visit Britain's been doing a Great Britain campaign, even though it's really difficult for Australians to go there. They're still keeping it top of mind. That's a pretty important thing to do because international visitation will begin. We don't know exactly when, but it will certainly happen. Okay, let's see if we can get this down to the next one. No, we don't want to. Okay. Okay, so we'll just go through the different stages of Tourism Australia. So firstly, what it's looked at is that initially the response for most tourism organisations, Tourism Australia being no exception to this, was panic. Now, in Australia, we had what we call a quadruple whammy because in December, January, there were the bushfires. that had a huge impact on tourism and the perception of Australia as a destination. That was immediately followed up by coronavirus. So Tourism Australia had a brand new management. In fact, the young lady who actually put this program together and has actually put this strategy together is actually one of my students only 3 years ago. I'm very proud of the fact that she's now in charge of risk and crisis, Elisa Jackerman. So initial thing was panic. Then of course we had lockdown. Then thinking about recovery was that certainly the initial type of recovery would focus entirely on domestic tourism, the opening of intra-state borders or interstate borders or intra-country borders. Then eventually there'd be the move towards free movement. And good marketing is always about trying to anticipate what the market is going to do next. So even before you have an onrush of international visitors, you need to get people sensitized to the fact that they can actually come and visit that destination. So as you can see, 4 stages: panic, lockdown, rising optimism, and then eventually free movement. But again, you have to prepare the market, you have to create the aspiration and try to translate that aspiration into reservations, which is really what good tourism is all about. Okay, we'll see if we can get this little thing. Here we go. Okay, sorry. Okay, interestingly enough, in the Australian sector, and I'm sure this happens in many other countries, the Australian government has actually provided a lot of extra money to Tourism Australia, both to cultivate the domestic market. So they've actually received some subsidy money from the federal government. And interestingly enough, the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, actually was a former head of Tourism Australia. So he didn't need an awful lot of convincing. It's very unusual that you actually have a Prime Minister who understands something about the tourism industry. That's definitely a distinct advantage. So there has been support for Tourism Australia, and the state governments in Australia have also provided a lot of extra money for the various state tourism bodies, New South Wales, Victoria, etc., to try and promote within their state. One thing which has been really impressive, and I invite any of you to do this, Tourism Australia has been running some incredible webinars, which they do every Friday, and you can actually see the past ones on their corporate site. So if you go into the Tourism Australia's website, you'll be able to actually see some of the strategic thinking that's been going on there. It's actually been pretty impressive, and I don't say that just because I'm an Australian. They are really ahead of the curve in terms of dealing with recovery, which I think has been really good. Whoops. Okay. So again, we talk about the idea of preparing people psychologically for tourism to come. And I'll just move on here. Okay. So interestingly enough, over the next couple of years, the strategy is to try and rebuild the destination appeal. And again, the Tourism Australia model is a very good model for other national tourism organisations to look at. Certainly, the concept of shifting in perceptions, driving intent, developing aspirations, and certainly in the immediate period, so in the next over the next 6 months or so, and this is the short term, is really stimulating interest. So again, a good national tourism organisation, and there are many around the world who are very, very professional, you know, Visit Britain is certainly one of those, is really about trying to create a psychology of excitement about traveling again. That's really critical, and that's one thing I think that all of us in the tourism industry need to be doing. We need to be creating an aura that when the shackles are off we go. Okay, and okay, so I guess the important thing is that we need to understand coronavirus. We're in the middle of it. It's all encompassing, but it's not going to last forever. And I think that there will be a very strong resurgence of travel. I think that's something we should all be very confident about. Our challenge is to survive the current problem. There are a lot of safety nets which governments have established, which is really terrific. But I think this is an opportunity. In fact, the very word crisis, particularly in translated from Mandarin, means problem and opportunity. And I know one of the subjects I teach, which is managing risk and opportunity. So it's important to understand that there is an opportunity. Okay, so we need to think about being resilient. How are we going? We need to be able to bounce back. It's pretty tough out there. Everybody, I think I understand that. I'm sure all of you understand that very, very well indeed. Okay, just a very quick thing. I know this isn't an academic seminar, but it's important to understand some concepts. So an academic called Cochrane in 2010 developed what I still think is one of the best models of business resilience. So firstly, understand who your market is now, understand what your market is going to be, because it's going to change. You need to make sure that you work very closely with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders being anything which include your employers, which include your regular customers, which also include people who can help you in your business, are really very valuable. It also is a time, I think, for business owners and for business managers to show leadership and confidence. We're seeing some very good examples around the world of leaders who have actually stepped up to the plate. One can only admire the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who came very close to death, and he's now back in the saddle and trying to be inspirational. And I think that, you know, you've got to give him credit for that. There have been some very good examples of leadership. There's been a few examples I think we all know about which haven't been quite so good, but leadership becomes really important. Critical thing too, that there's two words that are almost identical: flexibility and adaptability. We need to understand that we can't do business the way we always used to. The travel industry is going to change, whether we like it or not, and those companies and those organisations who can adapt to the changed circumstances will thrive in the future. Those who go back to the old ways are going to be having some very, very big problems. Okay, I think these are fairly obvious things. So I guess a really critical takeaway is to understand that that your business and destination is going to be changing in many ways. Your market is going to be changing. The price structures are going to be changing. The days that we could do that we could depend on high turnover and low margins, that's probably going to have to change as well. You know, it's a really interesting thing. For the last 20, 30 years, we've seen the democratization of tourism. We've seen tourism become available to more and more people because it's cheaper to travel, or at least up to last year, it was cheaper to travel in 2019 than it was in 1969. That's probably not going to be the case after coronavirus, and I think we need to adapt our business thinking and our paradigms for that. Okay, so people are certainly going to be concerned about health for a long time to come. We might, you know, many times people, we've had the mantra that, oh, well, people get over a crisis, they don't worry about it anymore, but this has been global, it's been very extensive. People are not going to forget this one very quickly. I wished I could tell you it was otherwise. So I guess a few takeaways is, firstly, we need a lot of unity of purpose. Every sector's in this together, so there's no point about one sector misses out. We've all been impacted by it, and that's really important, because if we as an industry can recover together, it's going to be much more effective than if the travel agents go in one direction, the tour operators go in another direction, the events people go in another direction. Can we internalise the lessons learned? I've made this point again. There will be a lot of questioning about the type of travel that we do. I think big groups may be replaced by small groups, at least for the first year after coronavirus. Mass travel, mass things are probably not going to be happening all that easily. And this not only applies, of course, to tourism, but it applies to events and sports. So health is going to be a big issue. We also don't want to obviously sacrifice sustainability. Ironically, one of the beneficiaries of coronavirus is that our planet's breathed a sigh of relief. Pollution is down, water pollution is down, the skies are clear. Animals that were on the brink of extinction are coming back. So this has been a lesson that certainly a lot of nature can do very well without lots of tourists coming in. Interestingly enough, places which traditionally have been complaining about too many tourists, like Venice and Barcelona, I just named two of them, are now saying, hey, what's the happy medium between too much and none? That's going to be an interesting thing to look at. The other thing that we need to do as an industry, of course, we need to restore our reputation, our appeal, and also to the trust in tourism. Tourism's copped a bit of a battering, I think, in many areas. Not only, I know I highlighted the cruise sector, but every sector. The airline sector's copped a lot of criticism. Travel agents have copped criticism. Tour operators have. We've all been in the same boat. We need to restore trust in the marketplace, and that's going to be a big challenge for us in the future. So we need to obviously think very hard about that. And I think that's just about it. Because nothing's happening. Oh, okay, yes. Well, that is it. I knew that was pretty close to the last slide. Folks, how are we going for time? Do we have time for questions? Sorry, Jed. Yeah. This was our little technical glitches, so apologies about that.
No. Look, that was absolutely fantastic, David. Look, yeah, we are running slightly over. We've been getting loads of questions, which is fantastic. So thank you so much to everybody for sending in your questions. If it's okay with you, David, let's dive straight into those questions if you're up for that.
Yeah.
So first of all, we've got a question here. As an existing tour operator specializing in the domestic market, 12 years in business in Melbourne, how do I engage with travel agents when our prices are clearly displayed on our webpage? So with this, how do agents make money when they obviously will want to make commission? We would look non-competitive to our existing markets if you were to carte blanche raise prices, say 10%. So is that an issue with the as a tour operator in the domestic market in business in Melbourne? How do I engage with travel agents when our prices are clearly displayed on the webpage?
Well, I mean, I think if you're going to deal with, if you expect a travel agents to sell your product, you need to be able to provide them with an incentive to do so. You can't expect them to say, okay, I've marked my prices at such and such a level, but you can't have any of it if you sell my product. I think it's really important, again, in the spirit of cooperation, travel agents are part of your distribution network. If they're going to be selling your product, you have to give them an incentive. And of course, nobody can survive without money. So to me, they're doing your job. I learned one thing as a wholesaler. I've been a retail travel agent before. In fact, it was my first position in my first real position in the travel industry. Travel agents depend on commission. They thrive on it. If they then charge on top of the very visibly quoted prices an extra $30 as a service fee to save the operator not paying a commission, that's going to make them look like rip-off merchants to their customers. Yep. Now, we have to be very careful about how we deal with customers. You might set a flat commission rate. You need, but basically, if you're selling a tour and you want a travel agent to sell your tour, you have to give them a financial reason to do it.
An
To me,
incentive.
it's obvious.
Absolutely. Another great question coming through here. Well, actually, it's more of a point. You know, we talked about cruise there at the beginning. With regards to the cruise industry, this is from Debbie Summers. With regards to the cruise industry, surely it will be hard for the industry to comment now, as there is a criminal investigation, sadly and wrongly, in Australia.
Well, the industry itself can comment. I mean, CLIA, which is Cruise Lines International Association, and I can actually tell you this quite directly. The ABC, which is the national broadcaster here in Australia, approached CLIA to comment on not the cruise ship in Australia, but the cruise ships earlier, the ones in Yokohama and Sihanoukville and Hong Kong, the Diamond Princess and all of that. And CLIA refused to comment. The guy I've learnt everything about cruising from, who is a regular guest lecturer of mine, the most wonderful trainer on cruising that I've ever met, and who knows 100 times more than I did, wanted to comment, but his organisation, his association for whom he trains for, wouldn't let him speak to the media. So I finished up speaking to the media, and in many cases I was actually parroting that particular chap because I've heard it all from him to my students. And I think it's really important is that ducking engagement for the media is really bad. Now, sometimes an individual company, if it relates to a case that's sub judice, obviously can't comment. I fully agree. But the cruise industry absolutely can. And the whole idea of CLIA, it is supposed to be an advocate for the cruise industry, just as IATA is for airlines, and just as the UN World Tourism Organization is for, you know, all sorts of business or travel agency federations. It's really important for representative organizations to speak up for their sector or their part of the industry they represent. If they're not doing it, they're not doing their job.
Yep.
Just because an interviewer is hostile, which many of them are, that's every reason why you need to be upfront. And one of the problems that I actually had in dealing with cruise-related issues is that I was stupid enough to do a tabloid interview with a tabloid TV program here in Australia about the Ruby Princess in Sydney, which I did mention. What they did at the end of the report is we invited everybody from the cruise industry, including the representatives of the cruise industry, to talk to us. They refused to speak to us. What does that say? It makes them look terrible. Yeah. What have they got to hide? And that's what the punters think out there. And it's really important to make sure that you have a voice and give your case.
Yeah, it was interesting actually. I noticed that a lot of the cruise industry have been coming out quite bullish in this, saying our bookings are up for next year, and there's no problems. And I don't know if that's particularly helpful either, because no one's doing well out of this. And to come out and say of all the industries, cruise, we're actually seeing massive increases next year. And I suspect, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I suspect that a lot of that is these cruise vouchers for forward bookings are just being used to book for next year. So yeah, of course, next year's looking up, but this year's probably a write-off.
Well, as you know, in the cruise industry, of course, although the average age of cruise passengers have gone down a lot, there's still a pretty huge cohort of people who are in the over 65, of which I happen to be a member of that cohort. And in many cases, you sort of think, well, okay, if I'm going to die of a disease, let me have a lot of fun on a cruise. Because it really doesn't matter. So I think, I think there is a large cohort of cruise passengers who would cruise no matter what happened, because they figured, what have I got to lose?
Another great question. Sorry, we've got so many questions coming through. I'm just really conscious of time. Let me just get that was it. Do you think virtual immersive experiences could be an alternative offer to diversify company offerings in the long run?
Yes, I do. I think they're an alternative. They're a very creative alternative now. We are living in the virtual world, and I think they could be a very creative, a very good idea for the future as well. Let's be honest about this. There are some countries it's going to take a long time before we can go and visit them again. So if you can give a virtual alternative, great. And you're still selling a travel product when you start thinking about it, even if it's a virtual one.
Yeah.
Nothing like the real thing, but it's still it is an alternative, and I'm sure it would be probably a lot cheaper for the consumer, and could still be actually a good money spinner for the people who are providing the service. You could actually charge a decent margin.
Yeah. Like I say, right now, that's all we have. Another
Yeah.
great question from Singapore. What is your assessment of business travel, including meetings and conferences? Do you think that it will recover much faster than leisure travel? In what ways will it be different from pre-pandemic business travel?
Okay, very, very good question. Obviously, during the coronavirus, we've found that business people are obviously, as we are right now, engaging on webinars and teleconferences and video conferences. It works pretty well. Look, we know, particularly in a lot of societies, there's nothing better than being able to press the flesh, whether we're talking about the G7, the G20s, politicians, diplomats, business people. But we are finding that a lot of businesses have learnt to live with the online environment. So I suspect that business travel is actually going to have to work very hard to encourage people to do business the way they used to. We've had this extended period of people doing business online, doing education online. I never thought in my wildest nightmares I'd be doing all of my lectures on Zoom. But I think it's going to be a challenge. So those companies that specialise in the business travel market are going to have to actually present a case why it is better to do this in person than it is to do it virtually, because we've now had people, businesses who are going to spend or who have already spent several months doing their business online. So that's a really big challenge. I don't think we can just happily assume that it's going to go back to the way it was. And plus also too, you're finding that a lot of businesses will be governed to a certain extent by the type of travel advisories they work to. That's going to be a really critical issue. So the regulatory environment actually plays a really important part in where business travel is going to be heading to. I think long term it's going to be fine, but short term it's going to be very difficult.
It's probably going to take a harder hit. I was speaking to the guys at Forward Keys, who have all of this forward-looking flight data. They've got the largest data set in terms of aviation in the world. We recorded a podcast yesterday, and Olivier Ponty from Forward Keys was highlighting that actually business travel has been the worst affected. When you look at the different types of travel, in terms of the forward-looking bookings, as well as what's been going on for the past few months, business travel is the one that has seen by far the biggest losses. And therefore, he was saying, I asked him the same question, do you think business travel is going to recover at the same rate, a different rate as leisure travel and VFR? He was saying that all of the data suggests that business travel, if it is going to recover to pre-COVID levels, it's going to take a long time.
I think you're right, Jed, and I think he's also correct as well too. Look, just talking about universities, we've basically, we've been basically told over the second half of the year, you can't travel. Our budgets have been frozen because a lot of businesses also too have lost money through coronavirus, not just in terms of their tourism. So they're actually also being much leaner and meaner in terms of about the way they're spending their money. So travel for a lot of businesses is still seen as discretionary, especially in the current environment. So yeah, it's going to be tough for the business travel market, but I think a lot of it depends on how well you market business travel and create that value proposition for it. So that's going to be a really good marketing challenge for our friend from Singapore.
Yeah, for sure. One of the points that you raised in your presentation, you're talking about things that businesses can do. Everybody's kind of hibernating a little bit at the moment because there's no bookings really as such to be had, and we're talking about giving people their holidays now. You have to take your holiday now as a way of sort of helping to pay them, but obviously a way of sort of saving money. And that kind of struck a chord with me, because a lot of industries now, everybody's doing that. So I've spoken to people who are in different industries completely, and they've been furloughed or whatever else, and they're also told, you have to take your annual leave now. And in some cases, that extends into, they're providing their employees with some of their leave entitlement for 2021. Is that an issue with people booking vacations then in the future? Because they're not going to have the time. If they have the money and they have still got the job security and everything else, if they have the money, they might not necessarily actually have the time from their employers to take a vacation.
That's a pretty good question. Actually, I must admit it wasn't something that was on my radar, but you're absolutely right. It is going to be a problem, because we talk about being time poor, losing leisure. If you have to take a holiday when you can't really do anything much with it, it seems like a waste, but it's something that I think is being foisted on us. I mean, I guess there is the option of some people, particularly if they feel that they have some job security, is maybe to take some of their future leave as leave without pay, which some people might do. I think people will certainly be feeling very cloistered. And I think the natural response to that is, I've got to get away. I've got to start moving. We've really got to try, and I think as an industry, we need to inculcate that in people's minds, that this is a release, even if it's going to cost you a little bit. Because my gut feeling is that we probably will find that travel is going to cost us a little bit more next year than it did this year, or than it did last year, actually.
Yeah, I think that's my feeling as well, that we're going to see. We were looking at again, like everybody, I guess, on this particular webinar, and yourself as well. Been attending a lot of different webinars on different sections. I've got a bit of an aviation background, so I've been following closely the situation in aviation. And what I found interesting was I found a report very recently by Credit Suisse, which was liquidity of a number of quite major airlines, global airlines in the world, actually including Qantas on there. And it was saying that they all had liquidity for an average of 3 months. I think Qantas was less, actually, before they're, basically in massive trouble, stroke going under. And it was saying that liquidity is on average doubled to up to 6 months if they don't pay out the refunds that everybody's due for the travel, which actually hasn't happened. So the feeling seems to be in aviation terms, and it's been predicted for a few years, that we're going to see a mass consolidation, and airlines are absolutely going to go under as a result of this, which is going to force prices up.
No question about that, Jed. And what's interesting, I get a speaker from the Centre for Aviation coming to talk to my students every year, and he's their chief analyst. And one thing that he's always impressed on my students, on an average £2,000 or $2,000 fare, the airline takes home about £9 or $9. I mean, the margins in which airlines have been traditionally operating with are ridiculous for a business. And sure, when the volumes have been up, many of them have posted quite healthy profits. But as soon as you get a situation, as we're finding now, when you don't have full planes, financially they go to pieces very quickly, because hardly any airline in the world, even the most profitable ones, and mentioned Qantas as one of those, they don't really have enough lazy cash to sustain them for a prolonged crisis. That's something I think that every sector of the travel industry has in common. That we've all operated.
And I was just going to say, with the airlines though, is it the case that really they've been artificially, propped up for actually quite a long time? I mean, it's incredible how low the profit margins are for airlines, and yet there always seems to be more entering the fray. And Boeing and Airbus have been churning out 737s and 787s.
There are certain parts of their business that do well. So, for example, the most profitable part of most airline services, particularly with the big carriers, has actually been their frequent flyer programs. And the reason for that is that most of the money that comes in to pay for all those points doesn't actually come in from flights. It comes in from banks, telcos, supermarket chains, and all the other places they get points. So that part of the business really does very well. And it's interesting whether you're talking about British Airways or you're talking about United Airlines, or whether we're talking about Qantas or Lufthansa, frequent flyer programs are huge money spinners. And that's, again, gives you that whole question about being a little bit creative in terms of how you look at sourcing your income streams.
Yeah, this actually links to, we're sort of talking about. Well, I think actually, if Carolyn is there, Carolyn, have we got a poll actually on to ask, because we've still got a lot of attendees online, and I think that we had a poll to ask, did people think that the price of aviation and flights was going to increase? Are we able to have that poll, Carolyn? Ah, there we go.
Yes, you are.
We are.
So
thank you so much.
I am just about to manage that poll now for you, so it should be coming out. Oh, it's stuck.
This will be interesting, David, and we can sort of see what people think, whether they believe that flight prices are going to go up, go down, or
I'm sure our audience
stay the
is
same.
full of pretty smart people, so we'll certainly see.
We'll take the lead from the audience. So when that comes up, audience, if you could register your vote, that would be wonderful. David, generally speaking, just while we're waiting for that to come up,
Sure.
do you feel that we're in a golden? There's been a lot of doom and gloom in the industry. And I'm starting to think, yes, you can get carried away with the doom and gloom, or if we look at this differently, are we in a golden age right now, a golden time where, as travel companies, tourism students, whoever we are, small businesses located all over the world, we're in a golden opportunity where we can fail and fail quickly? And what I mean by that is now the time that actually you can start trying all kinds of crazy stuff that you never thought you should try before because you were scared of failure. Well, right now, nobody's booking anything around the world. You can't fail. You can't fail. There's nothing you can do to fail, because we're already at a rock bottom. I laugh, I shouldn't really.
It's an incredible.
But, like, what an opportunity just to try stuff, because you can't go wrong. What's the worst that's going to happen? No bookings coming in. Well, hey, there's no bookings coming in anyway. So are we in a golden age of liberation where we can actually just, without fear of failure, just go out there and do that stuff? Give it a try. Give it a go.
It's certainly a great opportunity for creativity and for and to really try something new. We've seen it certainly in the high-tech industry, in the computer industry, that people have tried things new. And I think now tourism, the old models are really all under question at the moment. So I think it's really critical that we look at it as positively as we can. As I said earlier in the presentation, the word crisis means danger and opportunity. They go hand in hand. And I think those people who come up with creative ideas, you mentioned about virtual tourism, I think that could be a really big growth industry. And ironically enough, we have fantastic technology which facilitates that. So let's use it. While we can't physically travel, we can certainly virtually travel. I think the other opportunity too will be for people who might want to make travel documentaries and other things who can get around all the restrictions. That part of the industry, which again will be providing a type of virtual tourism, could also be really thriving.
Yeah.
I see Michael Portillo taking lots more train trips.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be taking more train trips. Just got the results of the poll in. Thank you very much, everybody, for voting. 55% believe that the prices will rise considerably. 36% will rise slightly. And there's only a handful of people that think it's going to fall slightly or fall considerably. So it seems to be.
I think they're on the money.
Yeah. I think it seems to be that general consensus that travel is going to get more expensive, and that let's remember here that we're talking about the flight side of the equation. The accommodation side, not necessarily. And I think maybe that's an opportunity. With low seasons. Obviously I'm bound to talk about low seasons, having set up a company called Low Season Traveler, but is that going to be an opportunity in the future for people, if they're getting priced out during the traditional peak seasons, for them to travel during the low seasons when they can save a bit on the accommodation because they're going to have to pay more for the flights? Is that a viable option?
As an industry, we've taught people to be very price conscious for decades. You know, in the 10 years that I was a travel agent, I think I can only remember one person who didn't come in and ask, what is the cheapest fare, or what is the cheapest way I can do such and such a trip? So maybe it was just the type of market that I was actually dealing with at that particular time. But we have conditioned people over a long time to be very canny about trying to save money. I think we also have to start to teach them about getting good value for money too. It's probably something we haven't done so well as an industry, and perhaps the coronavirus situation could actually help us adjust the way that we talk about travel. You know, so much of the media focuses on bargains, U-Butte, cheap deals, and all these sorts of things. We really have to try and, I think, say a lot more about the value proposition of travel. Anyway,
yeah,
that's
absolutely agree.
Yeah, maybe I'm saying that because I'm a lecturer in tourism. Who knows?
There's another question that's come in there from Kevin Murphy. What comment would you have to a projection that more individual retail travel agents will need to join networks and become their own wholesalers in the future?
I think that's a very good question from Kevin. I think most travel agents have to diversify their business. I know the travel agents that have done well have usually been those who actually have a niche product which they're really good at marketing, that they're very, very good at selling. I can think of some, for example, who are regular retail travel agents, but they specialise in battlefield tours, or they specialise in sport tourism, or they specialise in fine art tours, things that perhaps they have staff who are particularly good at dealing. So I think it's playing to your skills to a certain extent. If a travel agency has people who are great experts on a destination, they could be leading their own tours. So yeah, I think travel agents in order to survive probably need to do two things. If they can possibly avoid being bricks and mortars, that could be a pretty good start, because that's a very big expense for a travel agent to actually have property, or to rent it, or to own it. The other thing too is having a diversity of product besides just booking accommodation and tours from other products. You've got your own. Also too, if it is your own product, you can set the price. You have the margin. So, you know, travel agents.
Would anyone want to be a principal right now? You know, on that point with you know what Kevin's saying, I think is, you know, it's almost like, you know, travel agents, you know, doing the role of the tour operator and becoming the, you know, wholesalers in their own right. Would anybody want to be a principal right now, you know, to be the one who is responsible for pulling that package together, given that, you know, at the moment, and I don't know what it's like in Australia, you can tell us, in Europe and certainly in the UK, you know, you've got millions of people that booked for and paid, you know, their air tickets and their accommodation as part of a package for future months. And, you know, legally, they're supposed to get a refund within 14 days if the travel hasn't been provided or it's had to be cancelled. And, you know, for the most part, hardly any are paying out on it, because if they did, they'd go bust.
Yeah.
So now we're getting, in the UK, we're getting, of course, all of the legal companies, the lawyers, it's like, you know, the payment protection insurance. They're all jumping on now saying, you know, hey, did you have a holiday book that's been cancelled? Have you not received your refund? We'll help you do it. And obviously they'll take a cut. Well, is that the kind of thing that's playing out in Australia as well?
It does. It's interesting. I've got a travel lawyer as my next week's guest speaker, who's one of the best in the business, and they're doing really well, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
They're probably.
Who would be a principal right now? I mean, that's got to be a risky place to be in, hey?
I would say I would be much happier being a principal in the UK than I would be in Australia.
Really?
That is because your protection, the protection policies for those businesses which actually go out of business are a hell of a lot better than they are in this part of the world.
Really?
Well, I remember the Thomas Cook collapse. I actually did a paper on the Thomas Cook collapse and compared it with the types of consumer protections, if a business does goes bust, are great for the consumers. They really are. British consumers and European consumers are much better protected than our consumers here in this part of the world. It's a question of risk. I think there's always a risk. You can either wildly succeed, and you mentioned this yourself, Jed, you can wildly succeed or you can wildly fail. It depends on your appetite for risk, and quite frankly, if you think you've got a product that people will really want, then it's probably worth taking the risk, because we're in a situation at the moment where governments seem to be very nice about bailing people out if they do make mistakes. So
not going to last though, is it? Sure.
To do this.
I sometimes wonder though, where's all this money coming from? Because you're right, the British government alone has been they've been promising bailouts everywhere. I feel like we're going to be paying this for the next 20 years. I mean, is that one of the risks on this? Something we haven't really talked about is we're talking about people's businesses and everything else, but actually, as a global economy, how long are we going to be paying for this?
Well, I really think, Jed, our great-grandchildren are going to be paying this. Won't be in our generation. It's going to be on for a long time. I mean, basically, governments have unlocked printed money like there's no tomorrow, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the British government or the American government or the French government or the Australian government. We're all printed. Everybody's giving away money that really they don't have. And someone is eventually going to be paying for it, and it will take a very long time. This is going to be a legacy that's going to last for a couple of generations, paying for coronavirus, which is why we don't talk too much about it in the webinar.
Fair play. We've got another question here from Yolanda Lopez Bueno, who is in Ireland. How do you think it will affect young people, as maybe this COVID affects age groups differently? Thanks, from Dublin. I suspect that what Yolanda is looking at there is, will there be an ability for younger people to travel more freely than older people, do you believe? Do you believe that could be part of the recovery? Could be, if you are younger and therefore in theory are healthier, maybe you can travel more than somebody who's over 70, for example?
It's a good question, Yolanda. Look, in terms of your medical risk from coronavirus, the younger and fitter you are, the more likely you're going to be able to breeze through this. Whether it's necessarily going to be a better time to travel is, of course, a slightly different question. I suspect certainly in the period immediately after coronavirus, it's probably going to be a little bit more expensive, and I think our poll seems to have suggested that is the case. But on the other hand, I do think that certainly younger people also will have felt the shackles a lot more, I think, than some of the older people. So I guess, and I see this with my own students who are all in their late teens and early 20s, they can't wait to travel. They can't wait to get out of the shackles. And I suspect you're probably much the same as well too. And younger people are pretty creative with travel. They manage to find ways they can pay for their trip. A lot of them do have access, of course, to working holiday visas when they come back. So chances are, I think young people will travel, and they'll probably earn the money to pay for the trip at the destination when they're able to get to them. So yeah, I think young people are definitely in with a big advantage when it comes to re-travel.
I guess we'll see we'll see an increase in digital nomads. We're talking about business travel, potentially being down. People aren't going to be traveling as much. We've been getting used to now for the past 2-3 months of doing business remotely, and there is a few of us around the world, myself included, where if I've got my laptop and I've got Wi-Fi, I can work from anywhere. So all of a sudden, again, it's like we were talking about the issue about if people don't have holiday time. In theory, we can work from, Thailand, Bali, Australia. You guys have all got great Wi-Fi down there. Why couldn't I go down to Australia for 3 weeks with my family? We can have some days free. I can work, a lot during the day there as well because I've got my laptop. It's almost like a working holiday. Maybe that's going to be the future of travel, where there's not going to be as much pure vacation, but it'll kind of be a little bit more of a mix between business and pleasure, that term which we've heard a couple of times. Maybe that's the future of it.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, Jed, we've often found that at the moment working holiday visas are for the young, they're for the under 30s. There is no great reason why they shouldn't be for the under 70s.
Yeah.
To me, there's no compelling reason why it should only be something for the young. Maybe I say that because I'm in the older age group, but really it would be fantastic particularly if countries want to try and incentivize people to travel. That could actually be part of the incentive, that people will have the opportunity to work if they want. There are a lot of people who might be of retirement age who are really fit and who love to be able to ditch in and do something in a destination, but they're not allowed to by law. And regulation is really very much at the key of all this. So, anyway, just a thought.
It's an interesting one. Another question here, Gary here from Bruny Island, Tasmania. Good morning, good afternoon to you, Gary. What is your opinion on discounting? Hasn't elaborated, but generally.
Look, I worked in the industry for 30 years before I started lecturing. It was sort of a matter of right that whenever we got into trouble in the travel industry, what did we do first? We discounted. I always refer to it now as the financial striptease. Drop your prices and expose your bottom line. I think this is one thing we have to try and get out of the habit, because basically every sector of the industry, we've been losing money hand over fist now for several months. We've realised that the old model of minimal margins, lots of turnover, are not very healthy in terms of business survival, and it's put us into a more difficult situation there. So I would really advise most businesses to try and avoid discounting as much as you can. If you want to incentivize people, try and find a value-added way to do it, which isn't going to cost money, but it's going to look like it costs money.
Yeah. It was interesting, actually. I was speaking to somebody recently on this is on the hotel side, and again, I don't know if any of our listeners today or participants are from the hotel side of the industry, and it was a quote which had been heard from Bill Marriott, who was saying, look, what you do in a time of crisis if you're a hotelier is you close the bottom floors of the hotel, and basically every client that comes, they get an automatic upgrade as high as you can upgrade them, but give them an experience that's going to knock them off. So rather than discounting, just absolutely, upgrade them, give them that wow experience, which is going to send them away with nothing but positive stuff. But you're still saving on the costs by closing the lower floors. And I thought that was an interesting take on it. So instead of discounting, it's just all about value adds, but to the extreme. Give as much as you can on the value adds.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's much better to give somebody a free breakfast than it is to give them a 50% discount, because the free breakfast isn't going to cost the hotel very much. And I think Bill Marriott's absolutely right. Better to have your rooms being used than being empty, even if that's a low price. So yeah, again, we've got to be creative about this. I think consumers have every right to expect to get some bang for their buck, and they certainly should.
Yeah, super. I think that's about all we've got time for. We have run over our allotted time. Is there any more questions, Carolyn? Did you get any more questions through your side that we can post to David before he goes?
Yes, we did just get one, Jed, from one of our other panelists. John Koldowski is on the call, and I think the panelist mechanism is slightly separate. So
it's going to be a hard question if it's John's question.
It is. I might just unmute John so that he can share it himself for you. So, John, would you like to? You have the floor. Oh, it's gone all shy.
He's not there. He's gone to make a brew.
Well, no, actually, I think the problem maybe he's dialing in from China. So we are the mice who are running in and out of the Great Firewall of China at the moment. So, but I think his question is one that people would be interested in. So if we do have just a few more minutes to take it, he was asking about the issue of seasonality in the aftermath of COVID-19, because we know that historically viruses are at a premium at certain times of year. So I guess what he actually said to me was there any issues with doing that. So could this be a seasonal problem? Any thoughts on likelihood, and if it is, how could we handle that?
It's a bit hard to say at the moment. I mean, usually with a flu-like virus, and we certainly had this experience with SARS, and we also had it with MERS, and we also had it with swine flu, is that the prevalence of it went down in the winter time. Now, the problem that we've got with COVID-19 is it's global. So while one part of the world, the Northern Hemisphere, is now going into summer, and logic would probably dictate that the growth of coronavirus is probably going to reduce. In the Southern Hemisphere, we're coming into winter, so that Southern Hemisphere countries may actually be worse affected by it, because flus do tend to be at their worst during winters. And of course, the outbreak in China was of course right in the middle of the northern winter, and hopefully we could actually see. And I guess it's a difficult thing to do. I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't try and pretend to be an expert on this one, but certainly tracking SARS in particular, which was mainly in Northern Hemisphere, it pretty much went off the table by the middle of the northern summer, because it did happen mainly in Northern Asia and Southeast Asia. So it's a good question, because the majority of cases of coronavirus are in the Northern Hemisphere. You know, we sort of gave that list at the beginning. It could actually start to reduce. We certainly hope that it does. Because that could also hasten the growth of travel. I mean, interestingly enough, both New Zealand and Australia have done a lot to what we call flatten the curve of coronavirus, but a lot of other Southern Hemisphere countries, and I put Indonesia, of course, in that category, are finding that coronavirus is going quite rampant in those places. So it's a good question, as always, from John. I would like to think that the onset of summer in the Northern Hemisphere will actually slow it down quite a lot, but how much and to what extent, and there's so many things we don't know about coronavirus. That's really one of the biggest problems. And that doesn't just include non-medical people like me, but it includes, you know, distinguished doctors and virologists.
Good point. A point in from Kevin Murphy again. New seasonalities will need to emerge that will flatten demand into lower use periods, and those will require new approaches to those attracted to a change in seasonality from those previously preferred. If successful, this will lead to more sustainable employment and business steadying. Well, that's the point of my organisation. That's why we were set up. In the first instance, it was to combat over tourism, and the irony is, you know, this was before obviously coronavirus came on the scene, but it was all about trying to sort of flatten the demand curve and to promote the low seasons as a positive experience rather than distressed stock. And I think that this whole coronavirus situation is going to hasten that, because the flight prices are going to go up. I think that if everybody is going to be able to travel as they used to be able to travel, they're going to have to start spilling more into the lower seasons, which will spread the tourism demand, which will make it more sustainable. And I think that could be one of the positive, I guess, outturns from this situation. Any other questions? Any more questions from your side, Carolyn, that you've been getting through?
No, I think you've actually covered most of them, Jed. I think you've dealt with the one which we've had probably about 5 times, which is the can we have the slides?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say that. I thought I'd said it at the beginning. Of course, we will be sharing all of the slides from David at the end of this, and we'll make sure that they're available on LinkedIn, Facebook, and all of the usual places, including the websites at My Travel Research, of course.
And hopefully you'll be able to turn them over quicker than I was able to.
Yes, I think we've hit that problem that you have when you're doing something like this from multiple locations, where actually the human finger is still faster than the webinar can do things. But I think it's a useful lesson on warning people how to work their builds, David. So I'd also probably Chris is on silent and might want to come in, but I'd like to thank you for your patience with the gremlins, because they were certainly out in force today, weren't they?
It happens. It happens. You know, whenever you try new technology and a webinar for the first time. But it was really great that we had so many people staying with us all throughout the whole the session, really.
Yeah, it's been it's been fantastic, hasn't it? We've had a lot of people in, and we've still got a lot of people online, which is great. Thank you all so much.
Can I just say thank you for the terrific questions that have come in? They've been really good. It's been really a pleasure from my point of view that you've come up with some really beautiful questions.
Yeah, absolutely second that. So look, I guess we'll draw this to a close. Thanks a million, as David said, for all of your questions today. Brilliant questions, and thanks a million for indeed spending so much time with us. We really appreciate it. And of course, very special thanks to David Bierman for sharing your expertise with us this week on a fantastic presentation. Really great to have you with us, David, and thank you again so much from all of us.
Thank you, Jed. I really enjoyed it, and again, it was beautiful that we had such interesting questions coming through, yeah. and you asked a few pretty good ones yourself too, so that was great.
Well, thank you very much. You just made my morning. So thanks again. We'll be posting the webinar up online, as we said, in the WeTAC group pages on LinkedIn and Facebook later this evening. Just a note before you go as well, please do join us for the next episode in this series, which will be on Thursday, where we'll hear from the President and CEO of the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage, Mr. Chris Flynn, as he talks us through how we can ensure we're implementing the learnings from past crises. So please do join us for that this Thursday at the times shown, hopefully on the screen in a moment. We'll get them put on the screen. It's going to be 1600 Sydney time, 1400 Singapore time, 7 o'clock London time, and for our friends in North America, I'm afraid it's between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. depending on where you are. So look, final thanks again to our supporters and of course to David. Hope you all have a wonderful day, morning, evening, and above all else, stay safe and positive. All the very best. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again very much. If you don't mind, I might head off into the sunset, what's left of it.
Absolutely. I'm just trying to see if we're out. Are we out, Carolyn?
No, you're still on at the moment, but I wanted to check in and close. Well, I can close it down. I will basically end the webinar, but I wanted to check whether there was anything else you wanted to do. And we still actually have people on the call. So we still have, amazingly, we're now 45 minutes over our original start time. And we still have around 30 odd people on the call. So a real testament, David. So I'm going to end the webinar now and we will close out and start getting everything ready to share.
Super. Thanks a million, Carolyn. Thanks, David. All the very best. See you again soon.
Good night.